Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week starts summer movie season with the first entry, The Amazing Spiderman 2, which we will review.
Woohoo!
We'll also take a look at Brick Mansions and Transcendence among our new releases. Our top 5 this week focuses on the worst films from the star of one of those movies, our least favorite Johnny Depp films. Our triple feature of older movies is new classic The Sapphires, Justin's pick for old classic this month, the Charlie Chaplin classic City Lights, and a film in our Oscar A to Z that actually starts with the letter D, even though we're still in the A's. And we'll talk all about that when we get to it at the end of the show. Also starting this week, we have hyperlinks in the description of the show, so any movie that you want to find out specifically about, or if you want to jump to the top 5 or whatever, you can just click on the time next to that film in the description and link right to the spot in the show. So we'll be doing that from now on. Alright, well first we're going to talk about The Amazing Spiderman 2, and Joe's got that one.
It's a superhero film directed by Mark Webb and written by James Vanderbilt after like 3 other people. It stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Jamie Foxx, Dane DeHaan, and Sally Field. The sequel picks up shortly after the first film with Peter Parker, played by Garfield, still haunted by a death in the previous film and is concerned for his girlfriend Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone, as his double life may lead her to being in danger since, he's Spider-Man. In addition, Peter continues to investigate the death of his parents and the conspiracy of Oscorp's evil experiments. This ties in with the return of Peter's friend Harry Osborn, played by Dane DeHaan, and the rise of a new villain named Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. Well, this movie is probably the one I was most excited to see for the summer, and it pretty much delivered. Garfield continues to be a great Spider-Man. He balances the humor of the character as well as the dramatic side. He's being a likable hero is partially due to the excellent writing, which has Peter down perfectly. Stone is great as well, and their chemistry is a strong element which glues the many events in the film together. DeHaan does a great job as well as the tortured Harry, in the best portrayal of the character I've seen in any format. Jamie Foxx's Electro is also awesome. The effects with the battles with Spidey were great. Fox shows his dynamic talent by playing a pathetic and sad man, turning into a very frightening monster. Once again, probably the best version of Electro I've ever seen. The soundtrack is awesome as well, with a wide variety of different styles. This movie has lots going on, so it does seem like some things are a bit rushed. However, since this movie is building up to a culmination, with at least 2 more installments, some open ends are allowed. Even so, I did think that it may have been a little overstuffed, just a little bit at points. Also, kind of a negative for me, it's minor, but it is worth reporting. Justin, you'll be happy about this. The Rhino is a complete tease in this movie. And Paul Giamatti is sadly wasted, and his over-the-top role probably could have been played by anyone. Also, the end credit sequence is the worst, as Dan would say. It really is, and it's honestly my biggest problem with the movie. It just left me enraged because I thought that there could have been a real end credit sequence, and instead we got that. Despite some minor flaws, this was really an amazing Spider-Man movie. Just as good, if not better, than the last one, and I give it an A-.
Wow, high praise.
Yeah.
What did you give the first one?
I would say, for me, it was probably about an A. Maybe an A-.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I gave it a B+. I enjoyed it as well, the first one. To talk for a second about the end credits sequence.
I already know.
But you're still not happy about it. Okay.
And I'm assuming you're referring to the whole legal contract.
Yes.
The thing that makes me mad about it is they could have had something at the end anyway.
Yeah.
It's
but
like
most Spider-Man movies don't.
They don't, but the last one did. Yeah, so I'm saying because they didn't give us a mid-credit sequence, they could give us at least an end-credit sequence.
Yeah, basically what happens, just to flesh it out a little bit more.
Go ahead and tell them. Go ahead.
Is Mark Webb, the director, directed the movie 500 Days of Summer a few years ago for Fox, and they contracted him at that point to do a couple more features.
Yeah.
He decided he wanted to do the Amazing Spider-Man series instead, so sort of contract breach. So they came to an agreement saying, okay, well, if you advertise for our movies, then okay, and they realized, well, they're both Marvel. Fox owns X-Men, Sony owns Spider-Man, so there's a weird X-Men teaser trail. I mean, it's basically just a scene from
the movie,
the upcoming X-Men Days of Future Past movie. It's not even like a trailer or a new sequence. It's just
a
cut from the movie
Yeah.
for 2 minutes or whatever it is in the middle of the credits.
Cool, except that, it really throws you off.
It's really weird.
I
agree.
So that was really annoying for me.
But if you go see the movie and you're wondering why there's an X-Men trailer, that's why. What's I think is weird about it is after Days of Future Past comes out, it's going to be even more pointless. Because it comes out in a couple of weeks, and Spider-Man will still be in theaters. So
it's not like it's building anything
up. In June, when you see Spider-Man, and then you see this... I mean, maybe they'll change it at that point. I don't know. But
I doubt it.
I doubt it, too.
No one's going to stay. They'll be like, oh, that X-Men movie I saw already.
Yeah, I already watched this. It's... Why am I watching it in Spider-Man?
It's quite literally the most
jarring.
Pointless...
Jarring's a good way to phrase it, actually.
Yeah. All right, well, overall, I think it's safe to say at this point that the comparisons between the original Sam Raimi series and the Amazing Spider-Man series are over. Webb certainly has his own vision for the character, and while the first film seemed like a why bother at the time, and then was a pleasant surprise, like, Joe and I both mentioned we gave it positive reviews, the series has now gone off in its own clear direction and sets it apart from the original trilogy. However, for me, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a little bit of an unsatisfying follow-up to that first film. I'm still good with Garfield in the role, though his snarkiness was a little bit overdone in this one. I know Justin had real problems with that in the first movie. I didn't actually mind it there, but here it seemed like a little bit of overkill. But he and Stone really make these movies what they are. Joe mentioned their chemistry, absolutely fantastic. And also Dane DeHaan, I mean, the guy is a star in the making. We've seen him in several styles of films over the last couple of years, from sci-fi to drama to action, and he is an absolute bright spot in this film as Harry Osborn. I'm not as much of a Spider-Man aficionado as you, Joe, but certainly better than we saw in the original trilogy for the Harry Osborn character.
Let's put it this way: in all versions of the character I've ever read, he's kind of a weak character. Like he's tortured, but he's kind of pathetic. Mm-hmm. This one, he stands on his own.
He's great. Yeah, he's great in this.
He's not all about Daddy. It's about me.
Yeah. And I agree with Electro as well. I thought Jamie Foxx did a really good job. The movie starts with a great opening hook and post-title car chase, but throughout the course of the film, some of the action is spotty. The music cues I thought were really bizarre, and I'm not sure why Webb didn't learn from his predecessor having too many villains in Spider-Man 3. Like Joe, I think the Rhino is an absolutely pointless villain here, and he shares even less screen time than Sally Field as Aunt May, which begs the question, what was the point? Justin and I did not see eye to eye on the first Amazing Spider-Man, so I'm interested in how he felt about the second one. I give The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a B.
I can live with that.
Slightly down. I still enjoyed it, but definitely there was a little too much happening.
There was. There was.
If they could clean up a few things, but
it's kind of building up a lot.
I definitely liked the villains more in this.
You didn't like the Lizard too much?
He was okay. They
just didn't handle him well.
He was kind of underdeveloped.
Yeah, he wasn't my favorite part of the first Amazing Spider-Man. Justin, what do you think of this one? You gave the first one a C+, if I remember?
That is correct.
Okay, so...
Outrageous.
Yeah, definitely a lot less than Joe and I thought about that one.
After a rather underwhelming first installment to a reboot, there seems to be hope for the new series in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. While I'm not entirely sure if director Mark Webb was the right man for the job of rebooting the franchise, and I still firmly believe that he only got it because of his last name, this time round he does more of what the last film should have done. Focus on the mysterious conspiracies instead of the cliché-ridden portrayal of high school life. Although a considerable amount of time is devoted to a sweet, albeit occasionally melodramatic subplot involving Peter's relationship, which sometimes feels like it's the amazing 500 Days of Gwen, though that's not always a bad thing for the movie. It gives the film a deeper look into Peter's flaws, yet still keeping him likable, which is far more than can be said for the first film. That said, in terms of tone, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is all over the place within its over 2-hour running time. It never gets boring, but when it's trying to do so much from introducing new villains and exploring new aspects to the much bigger story, one cannot help but wonder if much of this would have been left to another film, such as 2 out of the 3 villains. Overall, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 moves the franchise in a good direction, but not without a fair share of flaws. Here's hoping Part 3 keeps up the good work and becomes the best out of them. And I leave The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with a B as well.
Well, that's a lot better than I was expecting.
I have to say, originally, I was thinking B- for myself for the film. And I was pretty okay with that, but I do understand that there are at least 2 more movies in the pipeline, and they've got to build up some momentum. I don't like...
You don't like loose ends?
Well, I don't... Yeah, I mean, I think
'cause
a movie should be able to stand on its own.
All right. I have heard that, and I can understand that. But I guess the way a lot of these movies are structured now with franchises...
Yes.
I mean...
and it was just about my biggest problem with Catching Fire, for example.
Yeah.
Is the way it ended.
That's true. But I mean, you could argue that whether or not that's a bad thing. Some people might be subjective.
True.
I mean, for me personally, because it's based on comics and they're trying to really emulate the comics, which honestly, if they're going on the ultimate storyline, they really are doing a good job. It leaves you hooked like the end of a chapter. So
that's true. I guess I find it a little easier to take with a comic series or a television show because you get that next installment within a few weeks or a couple of months.
That's true.
Whereas here, we're going to be waiting 2 years until the next chapter. So,
well, and the way I look at it is, if there's another one and it's great, it was worth the wait. And if it wasn't, it wasn't. But,
okay.
We'll see what happens then.
So, Justin, you thought there should only be one villain.
Absolutely, in this one. I mean, you both mentioned the Rhino. I thought he was so bad. I've said it from the get-go. He is a dumb villain. I mean, just worthless for a movie. And the fact that they felt that they needed him for this is pointless.
Well, I don't think either of us are debating that. But
no, but
you don't like Electro and...
Well, okay, Justin, before you go and make your point, and I mean, I do understand where you're coming from. The whole point, I guess, is usually upping the ante. And since the whole basis of this storyline is the Sinister Six, just like going one villain... Justin, going one villain, 6 villains? Oh, too many villains. We weren't ready for this. What else would you suggest?
6 villains, 6 movies. Like you mentioned, they can foreshadow things in installments.
Absolutely.
And the way the story plays out, Electro is such a good, exciting villain. The fact that like his entire bit wraps up with still a quarter of the movie left to go, it gets redundant, kind of.
I could see that. This is kind of one problem, I guess, with it, that I know you had an issue with the Rhino, for instance, and I do agree that if he was going to be in the movie, he should have either played a bigger part or they could have just like left him out. But somebody like the Rhino, for instance, he's kind of just a muscle-bound villain, but he doesn't mean he necessarily doesn't have to be in there, because sometimes, like, say if it's a big group of villains fighting, not every single villain has to be the smart guy. You're allowed to have a couple guys there that are just muscle. So him being there wouldn't necessarily take away from him. I mean, I know that he might not be your favorite, but he wouldn't necessarily be a waste. And I mean, for Electro to be like kind of the center of the movie and then another villain come in afterwards, it's still a different sequence. It's still a different event with different consequences. And they're interrelated, but it doesn't really take away from the one villain, I thought.
Which I get, but it starts having a Lord of the Rings effect in the case of Amazing Spider-Man 2. I feel like it ended 3 different times. I really liked the first ending. The second one was okay, and the third one was just all right. I'll take it while waiting for part 3, which I'm hoping is going to get us back. But I
like the fact that you're feeling better about the franchise, at least.
No, I mean, this one was definitely an improvement. I know I'm a little bit in the minority on this one. I've heard many a mixed review about it. But I mean, I
think most people are going the reverse of you. I think a lot of people really were surprised by how good the first one was. And this one is more mixed, like you say.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably more accurate. I don't know. Like, I could definitely understand people's problems with it, because I even think that there's a lot going on there. But I understand why it's being done, and they're trying to do a lot and handle a lot.
I really didn't want to see him fighting Electro for another 15 minutes. I thought, yes, it did wrap up kind of quickly, with the runtime of the rest of the movie. But
you had another story arc to go with.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually really 2 more story arcs at least, I would say.
You had to wrap
after
up.
that needed to be dealt with. So I was okay with how they did it, because otherwise, you guys know that one of my biggest problems with Man of Steel was that the end fight scene was like way too long, and I felt like if Electro
too much of a good thing
had gone on and on, it would have felt like that to me.
If they had ended it where they chose to end it, I would have been fine with that. But I think what they could have done is just simply stuck with Electro as the main villain, played off the main conspiracy part of it, which is arguably the most compelling aspect of the reboot series, by hinting at / introducing the next villain and going that way. And therefore, you got about a 2-hour movie instead of a 2-hour and 20-minute one that ends literally 3 times.
You know, Justin, I actually really do like your idea of doing one villain per movie and then like doing like a final one with all the villains. I really like that idea. But I guess the problem with that is it's not very practical, because by the end, Andrew Garfield would be like 40, and then people would be like, why are we still watching Spider-Man? You know what I'm saying?
That
like,
is true.
I like your idea, but it just probably wouldn't work. You know?
I mean, I'm not saying that there couldn't be more villains. I'm just saying, if you're going to have
Pick someone who's not the
villains,
Rhino.
don't do the Rhino, because the Rhino is the Rhino's dumb. If you're gonna have a villain, make them a good villain
And part of the story. I will admit, Rhino. The way I thought they were going to do it was, I thought that the Rhino was going to be like, they kind of did it this way. He'd be like the introductory villain. Like you have Spider-Man established, doing what he's doing, fighting a bad guy, and he beats him up, and then you get to the real story, like the intro. We talked about this before in the news, and if they had done that, I would have been fine with it. Okay, Rhino's the dumb villain, he's the appetizer, then we start getting into the main course and the dessert, and that's fine. That's where the Rhino should have been. I don't think he had to be an integral part of the story, but they didn't even do that.
Or a lazy bookend, for that matter.
And that's exactly what he was, really. I mean, and that's what frustrated me. If you're going to have him, do something more with him. And the funny thing is about it, unless they decide not to have the Rhino in there, which they've established they probably are, he is going to be a bigger part of the story. So,
Joe, you and I had a little bit of a differing opinion in our reviews about the music. I thought the music was super out of place.
Sometimes.
And with Mark Webb's track record with 500 Days of Summer, which has an incredibly well-placed soundtrack, I just thought it was very weird.
The only way I could think that it sort of worked is that I guess he was trying to, like, balance the tone of the comics a little bit. Because the weird thing about, like, Spider-Man as a character and his comics is that, as you guys know, there's, like, that duality to him. He goes from being really dark and moody to being really happy and joking around. And literally in the middle of his fights, that's how it can be. Like, it can literally go from being, oh, God, I'm going to die, to, haha, I'm going to make fun of you because you have weird superpowers. That's literally how it is sometimes. It changes scene to scene. So that's how I kind of felt about it.
If I could interject on this one, I think with the case of the score for this, it was just a group of people that probably sounded like it could make for an interesting score on paper, but just cannot work in execution. You have Hans Zimmer, who we all know can give epic scores. Inception speaks for itself. But then you have R&B Pharrell Williams, who does not gel with Hans whatsoever. And
the Philip Phillips song was, that one, Gone. That's where Spider-Man or Peter Parker comes back, and he's like looking through his dad's like files and stuff. I mean, it's a great song, but it made no sense in the context of the scene,
because it was supposed to be really dramatic.
Well, yeah,
and
it's like this love song, and he's looking through his dad's files, like it just...
Well, I think maybe in that sense it was like trying to say, I'm trying to reconnect with my dad.
I know what it was trying to say. It just didn't land.
If it's any consolation, music is subjective, and the people that I saw it with were all like, man, I want to get the soundtrack for this movie because it was awesome. So, I'm just saying...
But here's the thing.
You guys were
again, I love that song, but just because it's a good song doesn't mean it is well placed in the film.
I'm with you on that one, actually.
Do you know what I mean?
There were probably some scenes that definitely were a bit off. But for me, I guess it didn't bother me that much. The biggest tonal problem I had in regards to songs was in the one fight. I believe it was like the second fight with Electro, and they had his cool like dubstep theme or whatever it was.
I hated that so much.
I loved it because it worked because he's electronic, so whatever.
Which is fine, but it goes back to the whole like goofy nature of the first one that I was not a fan of.
All right, there's that song, and then the middle of the fight, it went to like just kind of like this upbeat, goofy melody that wasn't electronic.
Yeah.
That if they had kept it consistent, sometimes it wasn't very consistent. That's what bugged me about it.
How'd you guys feel about the way they implemented the spider sense with this? I actually thought it really gelled well with the 3D.
I liked it.
Actually, the 3D itself, just in general, was a lot better in this one than it was in the first one.
It would have to be.
The first one is maybe the worst 3D I've ever seen.
It had one 3D.
It had one 3D thing, and it was the very end.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like,
this actually had 3D throughout. I mean, it wasn't great, but it was there.
It was some.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the spider sense stuff was fine.
I liked that it was more of a sound thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I liked how they used a combination of both like slow-mo and also still shot photography, which I thought worked really well with it. I
liked that stuff too, actually.
I'm curious to see if it would actually work outside of 3D, because I feel like it could get a little cheesy. But just from the overall experience of 3D, really, really impressed.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, we definitely need to move on. Our next film up is Brick Mansions, and Justin's going to tell us about that one.
Okay, Damien, played by Paul Walker, has fought the corruption of a dystopian Detroit in hopes of eventually taking down Tremaine Alexander, played by the RZA, a drug lord who killed his father. To do this, he goes undercover in the sealed-off Brick Mansions, running into the wrongfully convicted Lino, played by David Bell, and teams up to bring Alexander to justice before he destroys the entire city. It seems almost cruel to attack the final film of actor Paul Walker, but this was another lazy addition to the never-ending onslaught of American remakes of recent foreign films. Granted, the source material, District 13, never sounded amazing, but it had to have been at least more tolerable than this. While the parkour itself is impressive, notably during the opening chase sequence featuring Bell, who happens to be one of the 8 founders of parkour, the lackluster editing and the lazy use of slow-mo does not bring out the best of this. The narrative itself does very little to do anything outside of generic action standards and cliches, and mostly deems it necessary to get increasingly ridiculous as the film goes on. Admittedly, Walker's filmography was never anything to write home about, but he definitely deserved better than to have Brick Mansions as his final film, and I give it a D.
Joe, what about Brick Mansions?
The plot is both generic and kind of confusing, and overall pretty dumb. The biggest gripe I actually have are the characters. The villains specifically are all annoying, irrational, racist stereotypes. There are lots of unpleasant pieces of imagery in this movie, including fast camera shots, loud gunshots, and lots of cursing. Then there is the dialogue, which only confirms the stereotypical nature of the scriptwriter's interpretation of these people. The acting is also really bad, with no actor having any energy in any of the line reads. Some actors actually look like they were actually falling asleep, like in that one Pentagon-related scene where the one bald general looks like he really is about to pass out. I mean, it's such an intense scene. The only redeemable quality in this film is the fact that the parkour-esque stunt work was actually pretty awesome, and the action kept me entertained enough, though it might have been because the movie was so hilariously terrible at everything else. So I'm not even sure if it's going to get a legitimate pass, but at the moment, it gets a D.
Well, on occasion, a movie will come along that is so bad that it will cause me to reevaluate my grade and up it for a recent similar film. One such example is Bullet to the Head, which originally received a D, and then I saw Die Hard 5 and said, well, it's bad, but it's not Die Hard 5 bad. This year, it looks like the horribleness of Brick Mansions is a gain for recent martial arts film The Raid 2, which I graded much lower than my colleagues here with a D+. I was still bored with it, but after seeing the fight sequences, acting, and story in Brick Mansions, that grade seems less justified than ever. Brick Mansions is a plot hole-ridden, poorly acted mess of a movie. Like you gentlemen mentioned, the only saving grace is the parkour moves of David Bell. Paul Walker's acting is okay. I mean, he's never really anything to write home about, God rest his soul, but not only is most of this unoriginal, it's poorly done too. And like you guys, I give Brick Mansions a D.
Tiny it's that parkour that saved it.
It's the only thing that was
aspect
at all interesting. Yep, you got it.
That's the only thing I liked about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the only thing that was the hook to it, really.
The acting was just terrible.
It was horrible.
And
completely.
The RZA was I mean, what a stereotype.
Hands down his worst performance.
Well, I mean, they're all pretty bad in my book, but...
Like I said, everybody was just... I mean, it's like, it's bad that they're stereotypes, but they're badly acted stereotypes, too. Like, if you're going to do it well.
Yeah.
You know? Really.
I'll grant you that one.
Even if it's bad, you know?
I agree.
Do it well.
Well, we don't need to spend any more time on that.
No.
Let's move in to our next movie, and this inspired our top 5, which we'll hear about later in the show, the top 5 worst films from Johnny Depp, and his latest is called Transcendence. Joe's going to tell us about that one.
Transcendence is a science fiction film directed by Nolan cinematographer Wally Pfister. In his directorial debut, it stars Johnny Depp, Rebecca Hall, Morgan Freeman, Paul Bettany, and Cillian Murphy. Depp plays Will Castor, a scientist working with his wife Evelyn, played by Belle, and his friend Max, played by Bettany, on creating a super sentient computer. After a speech he gives, Castor is poisoned by an anti-tech terrorist group, fatally. This leads to his loved ones transferring his consciousness into the computer, effectively making him a powerful new life form. The question remains, though, is Castor still alive, or is the machine truly all that it remains? Ooh. This is the main theme of the film as Castor fights for survival as the terrorists try to track him down and kill him. This movie has a cool concept and some pretty good camera work. That's pretty much it. The story here is just so boring. Nothing really happens until the second half of the movie, and by then you really don't have any interest. Also, the characters are all really undeveloped, so we don't really have any time to care about them. All we know about Castor, for instance, is that he has devoted his life to this project, and I guess he loves his wife? In addition, the only character with any sense, Max, is shoved off to the side. It's also really doesn't help that Depp was advertised, I think, as being the villain, but despite his questionable actions, he's really basically the good guy. The terrorists also are quite possibly the dumbest characters ever. I'm not sure why we're supposed to get behind them. I don't see how that can be, especially, since this movie wants to be so thought-provoking. The thing is, it doesn't really establish either side of the argument very well, and so I give it a D+.
Well, yeah, Depp's fading career, as we will discuss with our top 5 worst of his filmography later in the show, is in full vigor here. And with the way his acting has been lately, it actually makes sense that he'd play an emotionless computer for most of the film, yet he can't even do that well. What happened to one of my absolute favorite actors growing up? It's sad. Everything about this film is lazy. There's not much originality, and the people who give the best performances, Bettany and Morgan Freeman, don't have any sort of sense of their characters because they're so poorly written. In the positive column, I can appreciate the concept, and Walter Pfister gives a decent directorial debut, but I definitely would have liked to see so much more. And Joe, I'm with you on this one. Transcendence gets a D+ from me. Justin?
Pfister is trying to say big things about technology in the world today, and it's a shame that he could not find a means to make this more entertaining in Transcendence. Despite the 110-minute running time, the film feels incredibly long and spends well over the first half of the film, dragging out the most minimal of details. This leaves many of the side characters, notably Paul Bettany and Morgan Freeman as Joe mentioned, with almost nothing to do as the weaker points of the storyline become painfully evident. It's a bit of a shame because the first 20 minutes of the film are surprisingly interesting before slowing down dramatically. Depp continues his latest trend of giving dull and lifeless performances, but at least this time around it can be partially justified for essentially being a computer program for almost the entire film. That said, his general storyline with Hall does somewhat pay off nicely, albeit 20 minutes cut out would have probably helped immensely, and it does have some visual appeal, but ultimately Transcendence leaves quite a bit to be desired, and I give it a C.
Not bad.
Yeah, actually, you liked that a lot more than I thought.
I mean, don't get me wrong.
Anyone would have.
The slow nature of the film, completely justified. Depp's performance,
I'll be honest,
standard.
I'm with him on that one. He's playing computer. You can't really mess that up too much.
To be honest, I still didn't think he gave a good performance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the rare time Justin's defending Depp and Dan's going after him. I mean, granted, Depp has probably not wowed me in, I don't know,
at least
6 years.
Yeah.
6 years. This one, I don't think he's the worst of the bunch. I think it's just Pfister does not know what he's doing yet as a director. The script is all over the place. the worst part about the antagonists is they just don't get enough time to develop. We see Max have this whole like plot point, and then he's just kicked to the wayside. We don't hear from him again until the end of Act 2.
You know what? I actually talked to Dan about this. I actually say it on the podcast, Justin, because I just think it's so funny how the whole relationship between the terrorists and Max doesn't make any sense, because
it really doesn't.
They kidnap him, they beat him up, and then they say that like they worship him, like they worship his philosophy, and they're like, you know, you're actually a motivation. You should come join with us. And I'm thinking, you shot my best friend and killed him. You held me prisoner, and you're trying to go after everything that I stand for and everything I worked for my whole life. I'm not going to join you. And then I'll join you, and then you should listen to me. Oh, no, we're not going to listen to you. Yeah. Horrible plot.
It made no sense.
I'm just sorry, that's a bad script right there.
Yeah, no, the script really is the problem here.
It's not the directing.
Yeah, I thought Pfister actually did okay. I mean...
It's alright.
Yeah. Visually, it was, it was fine.
It's kind of his thing.
But the script was awful.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah. And Rebecca Hall, I don't know what to do with her, because I kind of like her, but she hasn't really given any great performances yet.
She's okay.
Like Iron Man 3, she was all right.
She was okay.
What was that one? Closed Circuit?
Yep. She was okay.
Didn't like her in that. And I
right.
don't... Yeah, she's
okay.
She's flat.
Yeah, I'll grant you that one, Dan. That's a fair point.
She's very pretty, but that's about all I can say.
Probably why they cast her.
I imagine that's why they cast her. And things. Yeah.
Before we wrap this up, Dan, I've often talked about the fact that Johnny Depp's stars is fading. I'm just curious from your perspective, obviously, as a much bigger fan than myself. Do you think his star is fading, or after Transcendence, would you say it's faded?
I think the problem with Johnny Depp is that he's put out so many terrible movies in the last, let's say, 4 years maybe, and they're not just bad movies, they are not well received. From Dark Shadows to The Rum Diary to last year's Lone Ranger, he is certainly not a box office draw anymore. I think that is clear. But for some reason, it takes Hollywood a long time to stop paying people an A-list salary before they realize, oh, he's not bringing in the bucks anymore. And to be honest, I think Adam Sandler was on that train before Grown Ups 2 last year, because the 3 or 4 movies he had before that were big bombs too. So I think one really good movie could get Johnny Depp's star back close to where it was.
I could agree with that.
So I wouldn't say that it's faded. I think it's still fading, but it's... I mean, a couple more movies like this...
And that's all she wrote.
Yeah, that's all she wrote. Nobody's going to give him the time of day. Like, Sweeney Todd was successful. That was probably the last movie I can say that he was successful with.
Well, on that note, I'd say we better keep our fingers crossed for Into the Woods then.
That's true. He's got Into the Woods this December, and that may be, another good musical for him. So we'll see. We'll talk, obviously, more about Johnny Depp with our top 5 coming up. But first, we're going to get to our final in the brand new releases, and that is The Quiet Ones. The latest low-budget horror movie comes to us from England and director John Pogue. Partially found footage and partially a traditionally filmed horror tale, The Quiet Ones takes place in 1972 and sees a college professor, played by Jared Harris of Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, embarking on a private experiment with some associates and one of his students to disprove the existence of the supernatural. It involves keeping a supposedly possessed girl, played by Olivia Cooke, captive in a room while they run tests on her to see if she really is possessed or if she herself created her supposed demon. The Quiet Ones is the only truly horrible movie of the year that started out with some sort of potential.
I didn't expect that.
It's terrible. And then it kept falling down the grading scale with every scene. It started out alright, and the idea of having found footage interspersed with traditional methods of storytelling was a good start, though of course already perfected by Sinister. But most scares, if not all, come from nothing more than loud noises or jump scares, rather than from actually frightening elements. Nothing that happens really makes any sense, and the conclusion is patently unsatisfying. Not to mention that the acting is certainly nothing to write home about. I give The Quiet Ones my 4th F of 2014.
Oh man, I'm surprised by that.
Yeah.
Wow, all right.
Not a fan. I can't wait to hear what you guys thought of it. Justin?
In today's cinema, POV found footage films are about as common as jump scares in horror films, but it's often rare when a film manages to do it even remotely well. This is probably the strongest component of The Quiet Ones, a film desperately clearly following in the footsteps of The Conjuring, yet unfortunately offering up more of the same. That said, the transitions between POV and third person are seamless and often serve for a couple moments of suspense. Alongside that, the performances from the two leads, Jared Harris and Claflin, who most people might know as Finnick from The Hunger Games, are surprisingly good, which elevate the film from being too overly generic. However, despite the film's title, The Quiet Ones only really has a few moments of legitimate scares, and the rest are rather by the numbers. Overall, The Quiet Ones is simply another edition of average horror films for teenagers that might offer up a couple scares for newcomers, but little for anyone else, and I give it a C.
That is actually probably your highest horror grade of the year.
At this point.
Above Devil's Due, Paranormal.
Oculus.
Pretty bad.
Okay, so the same as Oculus, but...
Yeah. Kind of sad to say that Oculus is currently the horror movie to beat right now.
Actually, for me too, and that's a bad yardstick.
Yeah.
Joe, what did you think of The Quiet Ones?
The best thing about this one is kind of what Justin said, and that's the two leads. I mean, Jared Harris has a commanding presence and gives the kind of performance that you would expect from Moriarty. And Sam Claflin does a decent job in his role as well. The story is actually kind of cool, though the style is pretty generic, actually. I mean, I just feel like I said this a lot before. But I can't really say that it's bad. It's been done before, but it's not bad. I do like the 1970s British setting, but it's still been done to death. I also felt that there were a few real scares here. It was mostly just reduced to jump scares, as Dan said. I mean, it's just loud noises, and I didn't find that scary, just kind of annoying, like, oh, we got another loud noise around the corner. These I found to be just cheap, and ultimately that's kind of a failure of a horror movie if they're overused. I also found the girl to be really unscary, and her scenes really kind of bored me.
The possessed girl.
Yeah, I just didn't
Me too.
I didn't care about it at all. Overall, I didn't think it was a terrible movie. It was just kind of a bland, generic horror movie with some good performances, and I give it a C-.
One of my biggest issues with the horror genre is the ending of the film. If you can't end a film with some sort of satisfying resolution, I don't see the point. And that was, like the Devil Inside actually is another example of this. I gave that movie an F as well. It started out pretty good. That was actually kind of scary, the one with the tattoos on her lips and stuff. And then the ending of the movie was so awful and ridiculous and just stupid that it was just like a complete waste of my time. And I felt the same exact way with The Quiet Ones, except it was less scary. So, But from the start, like I said, it's the only F I've given this year that started out with some potential. At the beginning, like maybe first half hour or so, I was thinking, okay, this is probably like a C+, maybe a B- if it goes in a better direction. And then, like, everything that kept happening, it just kept getting worse and worse. And I scare pretty easily. And other than, like, the loud noises, which I think is the cheapest shot that a horror movie can take.
It's pretty cheap.
It's pretty cheap. I mean, anybody can do that.
Yep.
My cat scares me, with loud noises. It's meaningless for a horror movie if that's the only way that you can scare a person.
I agree, actually.
And so that's, I'm glad you guys liked it more than I did, but I just didn't see anything.
I wouldn't say we liked it.
No, but more than an F.
Well,
you're both in the C range.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was okay. I mean, I liked the performances a lot from the two leads. That was the thing that carried it for me.
I mean, Act 3 it started teetering a little bit, but I mean, I wouldn't call it unbearable.
I'd say like for generic horror movie fodder for the crowd that goes out and wants to have some popcorn. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
it was all right. I could see worse personally, but Dan couldn't.
This is the worst horror I've seen probably since The Devil Inside. And that was about 2 years ago.
Oh wow.
So, yeah, not. This has not been a good year for horror.
Hasn't been a good year, period.
Well, that is true. That's just a factual statement. That's not even an opinion. This year is a bad one for movies, but for horror specifically, none of the 4 got a positive grade from any of us. That says it right there. Maybe Deliver Us from Evil coming this summer will do something. It looks pretty scary.
But new Purge a horror movie-ish?
Oh yeah, Purge Anarchy. I don't have super high hopes for that, but just as a quick aside, I do like the concept of the Purge.
No,
the first movie wasn't great, but the concept
it's fine.
Is good. Yeah, so we'll see about the Purge Anarchy. All right, well, let's move on here to our home media moment, and that is Cold Comes the Night. Justin's going to tell us about that.
Chloe, played by Alice Eve, has been trying to make ends meet for her daughter with her struggling hotel business when she encounters a nearly blind criminal named Topo, played by Bryan Cranston, who takes refuge there with his associate. However, when Chloe hears shots fired and discovers 2 dead bodies, she and her daughter are taken hostage by Topo to act as his eyes and retrieve his package. The narrative of Cold Comes the Night is extremely tight, and while attempting to make every minute count is admirable, it's also part of the problem. As a result of the film's rather hurried nature, almost no one receives a decent amount of character development. This is really a shame given that the characters in Cold Comes the Night are so interesting, paired with decent performances from Cranston and surprisingly from Alice Eve. Having an extra 20 minutes or so to go even further would have been more than welcomed. Instead, the story keeps racing ahead, never really losing momentum, but also never really allowing the audience to fully take in the people and atmosphere set before them. Cold Comes the Night is by no means awful, but rather a decent film that could have been so much more had it not been so short, and I give it a C+.
It was very short.
Man, 90 minutes.
Yeah. Joe, what'd you think of Cold Comes the Night?
This was a film that falls somewhere between the thriller and drama genre. The characters were interesting enough, as Justin said, and the plot is decent too, though I do agree I think it was a bit short. Could have used a little more time to flesh things out. And I like the original hook of this kind of downtrodden woman have to kind of guide this older crippled criminal. I thought that was kind of cool. They made an interesting, unlikely duo, and that was really kind of the good crux of the movie, those 2 interesting characters. And also, I thought it was really held together by some pretty good performances. I mean, Cranston is captivating as always, despite the fact that his accent was kind of silly. I mean, it wasn't bad, but there were moments where I felt like it was kind of breaking a little bit. But there were actually some other actors in the movie that had accents as well, and I forget, a couple of them were really bad. Like they were.
I agree.
Their acting was terrible, and I couldn't really forgive that. Unfortunately, it was a little too easily stereotypical. Still, I thought Eve was also a great heroine. I really liked her a lot. There was concise editing and good sound design, and it really helped keep the story moving smoothly, and I give it a B.
Well, finally here we get a tolerable home media moment. The last few, for me at least, have been really lackluster. Alice Eve, for me, this was her best performance that I've seen. I mean, I've only seen her in a few things, but I thought she was great in this. She's still beautiful, but she's done up here so plainly that she's almost unrecognizable, and I thought that made her character a little more believable. You feel for her struggle in this. Cold Comes the Night is not fantastic. It has some bad accents, like Joe mentioned. It's got some generic storytelling. It's a little light on the time. But for a low-budget thriller, it does the trick. And I actually also give it a B.
Oh.
I thought it was pretty good. I liked the concept of it. I liked the action. Didn't care for the whole blind...
Yeah, is he really blind?
Bryan Cranston thing. I don't know.
He's not blind.
I feel like
right?
He was maybe... legally blind, like he can't drive blind.
I think that was it.
But he can still see
He was
things.
still able to do stuff.
Yes. He's certainly not, completely blind.
No.
I think he was just legally blind.
But I just felt like it was kind of this misconception. Because he kept treating him like he was blind and useless. I'm like, he's not that blind and useless.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a sticking point for me as well. I don't understand why he even really had to be blind either.
No, I guess...
It didn't really...
They were
play into the story that much.
Trying to make him a bit of a reserved character with a bit of a dark backstory, so it's like they want to keep that sense of mystery, and I guess him being blind-ish was part of that.
I guess so.
Kind of like a guy out of his league. Maybe it was a metaphor for something. I don't know.
Could have been.
Can't see the path in front of you.
It certainly is not the strongest choice that the film makes.
It's kind of weird. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also some like real crazy people in this movie.
Yeah, like
the wife of the cop, for one thing.
Yeah.
She's a real wacko.
Yeah.
And obviously, Bryan Cranston's got his issues, but the cop was kind of a nut job too.
Cop was kind of a jack. Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I feel like Alice Eve and her daughter were the only two like
really sane people.
Yeah, sane people.
Oh, I also liked how Topo's relationship with the daughter actually was wondering, like, okay, this girl, like, how he's able to kind of have that balance there where he knows that she's a kid and he's trying not to scare her too much.
Right.
But I'm thinking, okay, this kid, is she really that oblivious?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he was able to be a little more playful in those scenes, like the Bryan Cranston we know and love.
Yeah. It's kind of why...
the scenes with the daughter.
He's like, that's kind of the Walter White character, and he's got that psychopathic side, but he's also a family man.
That is true. There you go. Another good HMM here.
Finally, right?
Yeah, finally we got a good home media moment, and hopefully that trend will continue. All right, well, now we've got a top 5, which is really kind of a bottom 5 when you think about it. The top 5 worst Johnny Depp films. This is in honor of the very average to below average Transcendence. And Justin, why don't we hear from you first? 5 through 2 on your least favorite of the Depp movies.
Alrighty. Starting off the list at number 5 is Dark Shadows. I have no tolerance for when Tim Burton decides to take his own spin on something that's beloved. Admittedly, I had never seen Dark Shadows, but the fact that he just essentially betrays everything that the original series was known for is ridiculous. My number 4 is The Lone Ranger. To be honest, this one's a victim of numerous production problems, but that is honestly no excuse for this movie. The storyline goes in every which way imaginable, and the fact that this was originally supposed to be the Lone Ranger and Tonto fighting off werewolves is glaringly obvious. And essentially, it's a 2-hour slog for 18 minutes of actual entertainment. Those 18 minutes are great, but the 2-hour wait for it isn't worth it. My number 3 is From Hell. Now, to be fair, the graphic novel would have never lent itself to a decent film, but Depp's involvement with it is not any better. His performance is sporadic at best, and they add a supernatural tone to his character, which is completely and utterly out of place. My number 2 is Secret Window. This is the first and hopefully last time we're ever going to talk about this one on Film Fanatics. Depp essentially took a role that he had the potential to do great at and completely botches it. And while I understand that the short story was never anything really to stand out, it definitely deserved better than Depp's lazy and heavily reliant on visuals performance.
I really thought that was going to be your number 1. You hate Secret Window so much. I've never seen it, but I know that that's one of your least favorites.
It's a disgrace.
Joe, have you ever seen Secret Window?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we'll hear about it coming up. All right, well, I'll go with my top 5 worst. Justin, good list so far.
Thank you.
Some truly horrible ones in there. And my number 5 was on your list as well, and that's Lone Ranger. I thought Lone Ranger was not good. I echo Justin. I mean, the last 20 minutes or so is really great. And, if this were a serialized film, that would certainly be far and away the best chapter, and really the only one worth watching. Depp's performance is basically Jack Sparrow light, which doesn't add anything good to the mix as well. My number 4 is The Tourist. The Tourist isn't actually that horrible of a film, but when you consider everything that it should have had going for it, including one of my favorite actresses, Angelina Jolie, and at the time, one of my favorite actors, Johnny Depp, and it just goes nowhere. It's horribly acted, paced, directed, scripted. It didn't bore me, I'll give it that, but the mystery element was not good, and the fact that it got nominated for Golden Globes is a joke that I think will never go out of style. Number 3, The Rum Diary. I really can't stand Hunter S. Thompson, so Johnny Depp playing him is an even bigger red flag. I never ended up seeing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for that reason, but when The Rum Diary came out a couple of years ago, I was obviously watching just about everything that came out, so I figured, all right, I'll give this a try, and it was just as horrible as I anticipated. Number 2, Public Enemies. This was just a misfire in the worst way. It's really, other than some of the pirate sequels, the first really awful Johnny Depp movie I had ever seen. It wasn't acted well, and Michael Mann's directing was some of the worst I had seen. It actually really put me off of wanting to watch anything else that Mann did for a long time. You never really knew what was happening in the action scenes. It was like who's shooting who, who's situated where. You never knew because of the horrible way it was shot, and Depp's performance adds nothing to the Dillinger character. Joe?
Do your number ones.
Oh, Joe wants to do his whole list at once. Okay.
Sort of.
That's fine.
My number 1, the only thing that Depp has made that is truly, truly worse than Secret Window. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Tim Burton turned a whimsical, intelligent story about a great character into this disturbing, ugly mess of a movie featuring Johnny Depp as this potentially great character into an annoying jerk with daddy issues. It is an overlong, awful, awful movie. The only reason I did not give this movie an F is the fact that I do understand that this was actually a lot more faithful to the book, and some of the scenes that I did like from the book are actually in the movie. It's a disgusting betrayal of one of my favorite childhood stories.
I'm glad you pointed out that it is more faithful to the book, because that's what I was going to say, because it really is. I actually like that movie. I know there's a lot of people that didn't like it, so that's fine. I gave it a positive grade. I thought it was all right. His performance is probably the worst thing about the movie. I'll definitely give you that. I thought Burton's direction on it was good. I thought Freddie Highmore was great as Charlie. Anyway, I digress. My number 1 on the worst Depp film list is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, which is the 3rd installment of the series. By far the worst of the series. I know a lot of people hate 4 more, Justin being among them, but I thought 4 was actually a bit of a bounce back from this. For me, the only even remotely good Pirates movie is the first one, which I would say is probably like a B+ kind of range, and every other one in the series gets a negative grade from me, and At World's End is by far the worst. It's a bloated, nearly 3-hour just nonsense fest. Depp is a caricature of himself at that point. Everything was horrible about it. I was so bored. The action was stupid. That's my worst.
Well, I saw it coming, but
sure.
Honestly, Pirates 4 would have probably been my dishonorable mention because, as you both know, I have made several attempts to actually watch Part 4 and have failed to do so on both times. I will happily call that one unwatchable.
Oh, so that's why you didn't want to put it on your list, because you've never technically gotten through it.
That's correct.
Makes sense, and I appreciate that.
So I leave that as my dishonorable mention.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Joe.
All right.
Let's hear from you.
Now here's the plot twist. Okay. As I was going through the list of movies that I've seen from Johnny Depp, and I was thinking, make a top 5 worst, I realized something. With the exception of Transcendence, there has never been a Johnny Depp movie I have seen that I have really disliked.
Really?
You've both mentioned a couple movies on your list that I have seen that I thought were kind of like okay, but I can't say I hated any of them. And you guys mentioned a couple movies that I've heard are really bad from him that I've never seen. I mean, Dark Shadows, Rum Diary,
The Tourist,
couple of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, The Tourist. I mean, like, all the really bad ones, never seen them. And Public Enemies, crime thriller guy, thought it was okay. It's a bit slow towards the end, but I liked the first half. Charlie and Chocolate Factory, I'm there with you to some extent. I don't like some things about it, but I thought it was okay, you know? So really, with the exception of Transcendence, I have never seen a Johnny Depp movie I've disliked, so I felt like if I made a worst of, they'd still be decent movies.
Okay.
You know, like, so that's why I'm not doing a top 5, because it just didn't feel right.
Okay, that's That's respectable. I mean, this is the first, worst list we've done, other than the Academy Award movies we thought shouldn't have been nominated for Best Picture.
I mean...
So, sometimes you'll get this, I guess, when you
I'm sure,
like everybody's films.
I mean, I'm sure that there are some really bad ones he's done. I've heard of some, but like I said, those ones that are really bad, I've never seen.
Okay.
Because I heard they were so bad, so I never had a desire to see them.
That makes sense. Justin and I have sort of been more avidly trying to watch just about everything that comes out for the past few years here. Mm-hmm. And you have not, so I can totally see why would you waste time watching a movie you've heard nothing but bad things about.
Like The
Rum Diary.
I wanted to watch Dark Shadows when it came out, because I heard it looked like something fun, but then I heard all these negative reviews, and I'm like, it didn't really look that appealing to me. Mm-hmm. But, so yeah.
I gave Dark Shadows a C. It's not good, but, it's watchable.
But yeah, that's just my reason for abstaining.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. So we know your number one on the list would be Transcendence.
Transcendence. If I was going to throw them together really quick, I mean, Public Enemies would probably be on the list because it's kind of meh. Charlie the Chocolate Factory is probably in there somewhere. Those are the only three I could think of that would probably make on a list. So, I mean, that would be my bottom three.
Because you did like The Lone Ranger.
I liked The Lone Ranger, and I really like Secret Window. A lot.
Honestly, I know a lot of people that like Secret Window. So never having seen it, I can't say. But I know Justin hates it.
I find Justin's hatred with it kind of funny. But no, I actually really like Secret Window. So, yeah, I liked it. It's a little cartoony. Mm-hmm. It is. It's a little silly, but the story is kind of silly. I mean, John Turturro is a serial killer hick bad guy. Mm-hmm. You stole my story. I mean, it's
I do love John Turturro, though.
That's what
I do, too. I don't think that gives him a pass on this movie.
But... Oh, no, it doesn't.
I'm just saying, I enjoyed it. I admit it has problems, but, that's an example. I like Secret Window.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, fair enough. All right, well, let's move on here to our triple feature of older films, and we have a new classic, which this week is The Sapphires. Old classic, which Justin brought us, a very old classic, really, from 1931, City Lights. And our Oscar A to Z is The Devil and Daniel Webster, originally titled All That Money Can Buy, which is why it's in the A section of our A to Z. All right, first up is The Sapphires. In the late 60s, an Aboriginal Australian singing group auditions for a talent contest singing their favorite type of music, country. And when they lose, the alcoholic host, played by Chris O'Dowd, goes off on his boss running the show and gets fired, leaving him and the girls deflated. They persuade him to become their manager and help them secure a gig singing for the troops in Vietnam. He agrees and makes them understand that soul music is what they should be singing instead of country and western. The sisters convince their estranged cousin Kay, played by Sherry Sebens, to team up with them, and the Sapphires are born. This film is a feel-good musical drama with an absolutely great Chris O'Dowd leading the charge, and the comedic relief as well. The songs are among the best in rhythm and blues history, and are sung well, even when sometimes the lip-syncing doesn't quite match up. There are many liberties taken with the true story, but with one of the Sapphires' own sons, Tony Briggs, co-writing the film, adapted from his own Broadway show, I think we can probably forgive fleshing out some of the story and inventing characters for dramatic effect. You never really get the sense that the Sapphires are ever in real danger during the war, and I think some of that drama could have actually been amped up a bit more. But all in all, The Sapphires is a really well-done film, and I give it a B+. Justin, what do you think of The Sapphires?
Stories about group musical acts are often present in cinema today, obviously with one of Dan's favorites, Dreamgirls, and the soon-to-be upcoming film Jersey Boys, but rarely do they have quite the backstory of the Sapphires. While the film focuses on their beginnings to being a traveling act, there is some emphasis on the backstories on some of the characters as well. Although this gives the film a fantastic narrative drive, it doesn't get explored much further than that, and feels a bit one-sided, as it's really only discussed by one of the four girls. That said, the music's great, the humorous interplay with Manager Lovelace, played by a very charismatic O'Dowd, is hilarious, and while the film takes more than few liberties, as Dan mentioned, with the actual story, nothing really feels outside the realm of possibility. The Sapphires is an energetic and fun story about a girl group, and I give it a B+ as well.
Very good. Now, Joe, this was your first time through on the Sapphires. What did you think?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to see this one for a while. I like a good historical movie. I think the coolest aspects of the civil rights tale is the fact that in this particular film, they're Aborigines. So it's kind of a different part of the world, different perspective. It's a good true story with some truly likable characters and enjoyable dialogue. I mean, there's some really funny lines in this movie. There's a lot of great comedy there. The soundtrack, as Dan pointed out, is also filled with some of the great tunes from the time. It really is good. There's like rarely a bad song.
Every song, you're like, oh, I love this one too.
That's a great oldie. You know, it's very fun. Just for the soundtrack alone and how it's implemented into the show is really cool. Overall, I'd say it's fun as well as funny. In terms of the actual war elements, though, I found the drama to be a bit safe, as you guys both mentioned, and predictable. So it was a bit formulaic, but I guess it's sort of a formula that works. It was a little too safe for me, and I think it could have strengthened the story more. Overall, Sapphires is an enjoyable story with good characters and great music, and I give it a B.
Okay, so pretty good all around for the old Sapphires. It really shows off Chris O'Dowd's comedic chops. I mean, you know, we've seen him in these bit roles in Bridesmaids, and you know, Justin and I talked last week about Cuban Fury, but here he really, I mean, right from his opening couple of lines, you know, where he can't pronounce the name of the town the girls come from, and he keeps stumbling over it. And his romance subplot with the one girl I thought was pretty good too.
Wasn't bad.
None of us really touched on that, but I thought it was pretty decent.
Yeah.
I thought the girls were all fairly good in their roles.
Weren't they mostly just amateur actresses?
Yeah, like one of them won Australian Idol or Australian X Factor or something. But I mean, as far as I know, she has no like acting training. So yeah, I mean, I thought for that they all did a pretty good job. I mean, no, like, you know, Oscar winners here in the bunch, but
I'd say it's like Dreamgirls Light, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I think they definitely did a good job, and the singing alone is just so good. You know, the harmonies and
definitely
everything really, really was well done. So yeah, definitely one to check out if you have not seen The Sapphires yet. All right, up next is our old classic, and Justin brought us that, and that is City Lights.
After being shooed away from the unveiling of a new statue, a tramp, played by director Charlie Chaplin, runs into a blind flower girl, played by Virginia Chirel, with whom he becomes smitten. However, after the tramp saves the life of a suicidal alcoholic millionaire, played by Harry Myers, he befriends him and finds a means to help the girl by pretending to be a wealthy suitor. In Season 1, I teased the idea of possibly running a silent film for an old classic, and given how starved all three of us have been for decent entertainment this year, I felt that this was a good choice to roll out. While Chaplin has made a number of truly wonderful films, none have ever quite matched the same level of humor, heart, and genuinely touching nature that City Lights delivers so beautifully. Chaplin combines his trademark slapstick goofiness as the iconic Little Tramp with a very sweet and charming story about human kindness. This could be easily dismissed by current audiences as melodramatic, but the way it's told allows the audience to mostly overlook that. Granted, the film's level of humor, as well as transitions in some cases, may come off as a bit heavy-handed, but it's just so well put together, it's hard not getting drawn into the storyline and whether or not our protagonist will accomplish a seemingly impossible task and hopefully not suffer any repercussions. City Lights is filmmaking at its finest and well-deserving of being considered a comedy classic, and I give it an A+.
Joe, what did you think of City Lights?
There are many things to love about Chaplin. His films are often very captivating. There is a simple charm that does retain some smart societal elements for, social commentary. The antics here are fun to watch, even though the plot is mostly kind of a series of vignettes, but it is held together by a decent romance, and the comedy is always on point, even if it does get a little repetitive occasionally. And I give it a B+.
All right. For our first silent film review on this show, it's interesting to realize that this actually came out at a time when sound was really taking over, yet it was still one of the biggest hits of that year, alluding to just how popular Chaplin was, and especially with his tramp character. Like Justin mentioned, it's now viewed as an all-time classic by film historians, and in 1991 it was one of the earliest chosen to be placed in the Library of Congress. For me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It definitely had a lot of funny moments and a truly great romance story, but it's hard to imagine that even in 1931, a lot of the jokes weren't obvious after doing this character in dozens of movies previously. There is something to be said for television not existing at the time, so people didn't have the chance to be hit over the head with reruns, but still, making a silent film in 1931 does kind of show the old-school approach that Chaplin had. While there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, obvious gags are obvious gags. Of course, the Three Stooges always did the same things, and I enjoy them, so it would be hypocritical for me to say that City Lights' obviousness hampers it that much. The romance really is the core of the film anyway, and that part is done very, very well, as is the social commentary. Like Joe, City Lights gets a B+ from me. Justin, huge fan.
Oh, definitely. I consider it the best of the Chaplin I've seen. I haven't hit all of them, but
Really?
yeah, there's quite a bit I've actually missed.
The guy did a lot of movies.
Well, no, I just
He did. I've seen most of the ones people talk about. I've
Okay.
seen Modern Times. I've seen Gold Rush. Obviously, we're talking about City Lights. It's interesting that you bring up the fact about his tramp character, because in a way, I'm trying to figure out a good comparison for this. His character, yes, people are used to him, but he often varies from movie to movie, his overall personality. In Gold Rush, it's a bit more goofier. In Modern Times, it's very much more geared towards the social commentary. I think in City Lights, we get kind of the best of both worlds. That's largely why I really love it so much. And the romance, as both of you have mentioned, is really the heart and soul of the story.
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Are the gags maybe a little bit obvious? Yeah, but I mean, if they're working, hard to say that they're not doing their job.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of likened it to the Three Stooges because, obviously in their shorts, which were out not quite that early, but pretty soon afterwards, they did kind of the same things in every episode, but it was still funny. I think that's kind of how this probably would have felt, even at the time. I think people still got the gags, but they were like, okay, well, it's still funny.
Maybe it's kind of one of those instances where the powers that be were like, okay, we really like Chaplin, we like his work, so we're just going to kind of pick this movie. It would be like the equivalent of finally giving Leo an Oscar for like Wolf of Wall Street or something like that. It's not that great of a movie, but he deserves an Oscar for all the great things.
For something,
It's kind of like maybe that's why they picked it. But, who knows? Maybe a lot of people felt it really was deserving.
Yeah, I mean, listen, as we view more of these, I mean, this is maybe the 5th silent film I've ever seen. I mean, I haven't seen many. So maybe as we go along with the show and I see more, I'll sort of realize that the tramp character, like you say, Justin, is a little more nuanced in this one maybe than in some of the others, or it's different or whatever. I'm fine being schooled in it like that. I'm glad you brought it. I mean, it was
a nice change of pace.
I love the old classic.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to get. It could be just from any era, any genre. So this was definitely a fun one, Justin.
Thank you.
All right, and our final movie this week is The Devil and Daniel Webster, which came out in 1941 and was originally titled All That Money Can Buy, which is why it's in the middle of the A's for our purposes. It got nominated for only dramatic score and Best Actor for Walter Houston, who actually plays the supporting role of Mr. Scratch, a.k.a. the Devil. And Joe's going to tell us about The Devil and Daniel Webster.
Yes, I am. The Devil and Daniel Webster, or All That Money Can Buy, is a 1941 fantasy film based on the short story by Stephen Benet. It stars Edward Arnold, Walter Houston, and James Craig. It was directed by William D. Thierry. The film follows downtrodden farmer Jabez Stone, played by Craig, as nothing seems to go right for him. This attracts the attention of Mr. Scratch, who's played by Houston, who is basically our devil for the story. For 7 years of prosperity, Mr. Scratch only asks Jabez for one small thing in return, his soul. Jabez takes the deal, but when his time is nearly running out, he begs his hero, the famed orator and politician Daniel Webster, played by Arnold, to help him. This leads to Webster's own soul being threatened as he defends Jabez in a trial, with members of the jury being notorious people from American history. This film is yet one of the many Faustian tales and very ingrained in its time. The characters are complex enough, though, and there is a fairly significant dilemma, which is interesting. It's also a decent commentary on American ideals and the economic struggle. Houston also plays a really good devil, I thought. He's fun when he needs to be, but actually really creepy when he needs to be, and all wrapped up in that sophisticated grace like a devil should be. Actually, a little bit daring, I thought, for the time. Like having a genuinely frightening character like that. Webster is also a likable character, though he is kind of perhaps a little bit of an over-idealized concept of a politician, I think. This movie, though, was really well shot and lit. I mean, I loved the editing and the camera work here, created some really good atmosphere, with the shadows. I just thought that it really worked well in enhancing some of the strong tones throughout the movie. I really liked that a lot. Still, the biggest problem for me was the pacing was a bit off at points, because, in the middle of the film, it was dragging for me. I don't know why. It's it had, this really cool beginning, and, sporadically there'd be interesting moments, but there were just chunks of the movie that felt like they didn't really need to be that long. Still, I thought it told a fairly compelling and even a risky story for the time. Not to mention, despite the rather recycled old story that's been around forever, I thought that there were some original ideas here, and I give it a B.
All right, Justin, what do you think of The Devil and Daniel Webster?
As we've seen in a number of movies on the Oscar docket, early Oscar nominees and winners could be considered melodramatic and cheesy by today's standards, but there's a certain level of heart that allows one to look past it to see the film for what it is. This was often emphasized in the work of classic director Frank Capra, which prompted many a filmmaker to emulate this, which was unquestionably the motive behind the director of this film with The Devil and Daniel Webster. While the film is essentially a morality tale with an obvious message, it often focuses on the underdog dealing with the consequences of temptation, eventually having to literally fight for his life. That said, although the film's storyline is definitely dark, the film never becomes too unpleasant and remains, for the most part, entertaining. Although the conclusion of the film becomes a bit preachy, The Devil and Daniel Webster is a very interesting addition to our Oscar docket, and I give it a B-.
Yeah, I will point out the reason the name change was because there was a movie that same year from RKO Pictures called The Devil and Miss Jones. And even though the story was called The Devil and Daniel Webster, they didn't really want confusion with that. Nowadays, of course, that wouldn't bother anybody. Movies come out with the same basic title all the time, like Safe House and Silent House, for example, being out the same month. But anyway, so they changed it to All That Money Can Buy, which is a line uttered in the film. It's hard to deny the general concept of this, and the storyline is certainly compelling. But the film version is bogged down with an unnecessary romance, all too standard at the time, over-the-top acting from some of the people, and pacing problems like Joe mentioned. Now, once it hits the courtroom climax, it gets really riveting. I thought, like Joe also said, the actors that played both the Devil and Daniel Webster were both really good. I loved the concept of the jury, being the historical figures. The judge was cool. And I thought the effects were also pretty good for the time as well. But I don't know. Overall, a tale this classic shouldn't be quite this boring. And I also give it a B-. If it had just picked up a little bit in that middle section,
it would have made a world of difference.
It really would have. I mean, just clean it up a little bit. I mean, the romance wasn't even that belabored. It just dragged it down.
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, if it was longer, it would have made it worse, obviously. But the few scenes we got with the romance were like, all right, we want to get back to the real heart of the story.
I'll be honest, if the rest of the movie had been like that courtroom scene, I think I would have given it like a B+ or an A-.
Oh, I would have given it like an A- for sure.
That was the best part.
Yeah, and unfortunately it comes,
I'll be honest,
like an hour
so
into the movie.
I think the biggest problem with it is probably the fact that Webster isn't really in it enough.
Yeah, he's really not, and I wasn't quite even sure
it was really about him.
Yeah, it was called him, but then
It's
it was
more
called The Devil and
about
Daniel Webster, but we didn't see him
Jabez.
for a while.
Yeah, It's not really his story. He's kind of like a side plot. It's almost like he's in the title, he's a subject of what's going on, but the story isn't really about him necessarily.
No. It's definitely about what's his name?
Jabez.
Jabez. Great name.
Interesting name.
Yeah, I never heard that one before.
I guess it's common in New Hampshire.
Jabez, yeah, maybe. But yeah, it's really his story.
Yeah, he's the main character. Yeah.
But anyway, it's always a classic tale. You know, I do like whenever TV shows or movies have that sort of sell your soul to the devil kind of thing going.
Happens all the time.
Yeah,
but it's classic.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that is going to do it for this week's show. Don't forget to check out the hyperlinks now in the description portion of the show, and you can jump right to the movie you want to hear most about, or our top 5 list, or whatever. Joe, anything going on? I know there's a lot of summer movies coming out, so you'll probably have a lot of reviews on your channel.
Yeah, it's going to be big. My friends and I are trying to, we have, a list of, the different big ones we want to hit. I mean, there's a couple we want to see, like Godzilla, X-Men, Guardians of the Galaxy, Sin City 2 eventually. And there's ones we want to, get there to hate on, like Turtles and Transformers.
Sure.
There's some we got on the docket. We had a couple videos recently. If you want to hear extended review, I did a review with Jenna on Transcendence. And,
yeah.
We also discussed some upcoming summer movies. And I did a more expanded review on Spider-Man. And also did a live stream with some friends of mine where we just talked about a bunch of different topics. So yeah, a couple things.
Very cool.
On the YouTube channel.
And you can link to that in the description of this video as well. And then you guys are going to be wrapping up the Godzilla ramp up here soon, right?
Yeah, we're going to. We have to kind of get caught up, so we'll probably just crank out a couple videos over the next couple weeks. I don't know if we'll
make that deadline.
I don't know if we'll make get all the videos recorded out before it, but we'll get them out, and we might even do a separate video specifically on the movie in addition to this podcast as well.
Yeah, sure. All right, and don't forget to check us out on the Facebook group. Our 5-word reviews are there every single week leading up to the new episode being posted. So you can check that out at Film Fanatics with an exclamation point on Facebook. Our Twitter is at Film Fanatics Pod. And, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And we'll see you back here next week on Film Fanatics. Thanks for listening. Bye!